What's up? What's good? We are back on the channel today with another banger. It's been a minute, guys, but I'm glad to be back on the channel, and we're gonna start things off again back on the channel with a great video. In this video, we're gonna review "Hurry Up Tomorrow" by The Weeknd. And as you guys may or may not know, probably do know, "Hurry Up Tomorrow" is The Weeknd's sixth studio album. It came out a couple weeks ago. I'm a huge Weeknd fan, so I'm very excited for it. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So starting things off, from a artist ability standpoint, this album is elite. It's a classic. Abel really did his thing with this one. His vocals were amazing, as usual. Like The Weeknd has some of the greatest vocals like ever. Now I wouldn't say he's like on the same level as Michael Jackson or maybe even Prince, but he still has amazing vocals, and he will go down as one of the best like vocalists or singers ever. So from a vocal standpoint, this album was great. Lyricism hit. This was some of the Weeknd's best like penmanship or songwriting that we've seen. And he's really gotten better throughout the years at songwriting. So this kind of like shows that the culmination of his career was with some of his best like writing. Along with that, the production was heavenly. So many songs were just like beautiful in terms of production. Like essentially the whole album just had great production. Each track was layered with so many different like things. So much variety was put into like each song. Like no two songs sounded the exact same, which I really enjoyed. Mike Dean did his thing on his songs. Metro did his thing. The Weeknd helped out with some of the production as well. So it was just fantastic. Along with that, the features were also great. Like Travis Scott on Reflections Laughing was fantastic. Future on both of his verses, or I guess both of his songs. Playboy Cardi on Timeless, obviously. Lana Del Rey was fantastic on The Abyss. So, again, from solely an artist ability standpoint, this album is a classic. Now, from an album quality standpoint, this album is also elite. There's genuinely no skips. The worst song, in my opinion, was Sao Paulo. And even then, like, Sao Paulo was still a really good song. I originally thought when he, like, dropped it as a single that it was pretty mid, but listening to it over and over again, I've really kind of gotten to enjoy it. And it's turned out to be a solid song. Now, the popular songs, as you guys may already know, are Timeless, Sao Paulo, and Cry For Me. In my opinion, the underrated songs on this album are Red Terror, was just amazing. Drive was also great, and Big Sleep. And in my opinion, the best songs on this album are The Abyss, Open Hearts, and probably Reflections Laughing. So again, from an album quality standpoint, this album is great. And I'm not even like accounting for like all the samples that are on this album, including like MJ in the first song and a lot of other like samples. So again, this album is just elite. Finally, onto the concept. I personally believe that concept is one of the most important points to consider when like ranking an album or like doing a review of an album. And this album just had an elite concept. Hurry Up Tomorrow essentially just completes the trilogy of After Hours and Dawn FM, and it completes the narrative arc that's told in those two stories, or I guess technically those two albums. Starting off with After Hours, The Weeknd dies in After Hours after he lives this lifestyle of drugs, women, alcohol, and essentially the quintessential lifestyle that you see out of like a Hollywood LA superstar. He then goes into purgatory in Dawn FM, where he recounts his past relationships with women and past experiences with them. And he shows how he had generational trauma that ended up building up to him just not only consciously losing the woman that he cared for, but also subconsciously not realizing that he was just pushing the woman he loved away from him. Finally, in the end of the album, he gives up his like worries, and essentially he lets go of all his regrets that he has. And it was a really beautiful album. Jim Carrey kind of like narrates this radio-esque thing that is purgatory, and throughout this radio-esque thing, finally in the end, Jim Carrey allows The Weeknd to let go of his regrets in Phantom Regret. So here in A Hurry Up Tomorrow, you see The Weeknd finally ascend into heaven. He essentially recounts his life one last time, and this includes his key moments and his darkest moments. So some examples were like losing his voice. There was an example of a hotel bathroom incident in Dallas where he almost drowns and dies. Another example is not necessarily of him, but more so his mom moving from Ethiopia, because of all the war and political instability they had during that time, and her moving to the West, which is essentially like Toronto, so that The Weeknd could have like a proper life and like a more stable like home environment. So that's essentially like the point of this album, like conceptually, right? The storyline wise. But I think it's deeper than just like him showing like his last like point as The Weeknd and before he sends it to heaven, right? I think another big thing about this album is that it tackles The Weeknd as a person, or like Abel himself, right? So essentially the point of this album is that it's The Weeknd's last album. Abel's retiring The Weeknd persona. He's gonna like pursue music in the future as just Abel. And I think the big point of this album was that he tries to like reconcile with his fans that it's an end of an era, you know? And he's trying to like see if fans are willing to like appreciate him for what he did in the past, but also appreciate him for like his next steps in the future. And I think it's really important because like especially like in some of the songs and closer to the end, he kind of reminisces on the past when he was able to persevere through physical pain, emotional pain, and he was able to essentially get through the bad parts of his life by like overcoming all his difficulties. But now he's realized that like he's ready to start a new life and he's ready to shed this Weeknd persona. And specifically, in the final song, Hurry Up Tomorrow, this song transitions into High for This, which was like essentially The Weeknd's first song as The Weeknd. And I think this kind of like shows how it's a cyclical process, at least for The Weeknd's like persona. I think this just essentially just shows that like Abel is able to shed The Weeknd's persona and ascend into heaven and begin this new life, right? This new life that essentially serves an analogy for his new life now, as Abel instead of The Weeknd, right? But the thing is that The Weeknd's persona is essentially stuck in this time loop, right? Where he goes through all this pain, regret, and all these pitfalls that Abel went through in the past as The Weeknd, you know? So essentially, it's just as akin to like a caterpillar shedding its like cocoon and becoming a butterfly. The Weeknd is shedding himself of his like persona and becoming this new man who's a lot more in tune with God, who is essentially a more like not only just a spiritual person but also someone that's like let go of his regrets. He's become a better person overall. He's let go of all his addictions that he's had in the past. So I think that's just like what this final song was trying to like portray and show. So again, this album is just fantastic from a conceptual standpoint. Like not only does it complete the trilogy storyline, but also kind of applies to real life in that it's The Weeknd showing how Abel is now the one in charge, you know? Finally, let's compare this album to the rest of The Weeknd's discography. So essentially given all the context that I just gave you of the concept, how this is his last album as The Weeknd, how this essentially completes the trilogy, and in my opinion, one of the greatest pop trilogies ever, and one of the greatest just trilogies of like any music ever, you know? Not only that, but also the fact that the concept is really cool, and the concept not only applies to the previous albums he made, but also his like himself as a person and in real life. So given all of this and the fact that the album just like sounds great, The Weeknd does great on the album, and it's just like a masterpiece of an album. This album just has to be like considered as one of the greatest like pop albums ever, you know? It's, in my opinion, The Weeknd's magnum opus. I consider this his best album. It's tough to like rank it with like, you know, other like bangers that he has, such as like Dawn FM, After Hours, House of Balloons, which is a classic, Kissland, Mind Your Melancholy, whatever. But I just think because of how like unique and how cool the concept is, along with the fact that it just concludes his career on just a great note, it has to make this his best album, in my opinion. And because of that, and because of like how influential The Weeknd has been throughout his career and how like fantastic this closing album was, this album, in my opinion, is a 10 out of 10. One of the best pop albums ever, and I think it closes the case as the The Weeknd essentially just like shows that like he is one of the greatest, not only hit makers, but one of the greatest artists ever. That's all we have for today, folks. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And let me know down below what you guys think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? What are your opinions on this album? And that's all we have for today again. So long.